Before I begin, I wanted to warn you that this video will contain spoilers for Metroid Dread. If you haven't played it yet, or you're still working on it, you may want to do that first. For a while now, I've wondered if Nintendo makes all of its business decisions with a monkey and a dartboard. Metroid Dread has me convinced that they are eerily aware of what fans want. Or their monkey just really likes Metroid. This game is the perfect love letter to die-hard Metroid fans. I love how they just pick up the story right where they left off with Fusion 20 years ago, like nothing happened. No prequel or ambiguous between two games timeline bullshit. No reboots. They actually respect the lore that they established. And Fusion was a big deal story-wise. It's the wildest direction a Metroid has taken in terms of story thus far. The Metroids were a natural predator for the X-Parasites, and with every Metroid exterminated, the X-Parasites were able to repopulate. Samus is infected by one of these parasites, and is only able to survive after being injected with Metroid DNA. Personally, I think Nintendo just got tired of casuals calling Samus Metroid, so they said, you know what, now you're right, you just have bad grammar, stupid. This is a major change for Samus, both from a gameplay and a character perspective, and I'm so glad they didn't try to gloss over it or water the story down. There's a pretty big lore drop at the beginning though. I have to wonder what that was like for people new to the series. Don't know what Metroid is? Never played one before? Shut up and read, you're a big boy, this is a big boy game. In a lot of ways, it feels like Metroid Dread is the result of a desire to build upon and correct the shortcomings of Fusion, both due to limitations of the hardware and the game's core design. Fusion was the most linear and story-driven entry in the series. The areas were mostly disconnected, and there was an AI guiding you from point to point on a map, only leaving you to explore the general vicinity before you found a path to the goal. It didn't give you that same sense of being lost or subtly guided, but the game made up for it with a haunting atmosphere that was unique in its own way. Prior Metroid games were terrifying because you were alone. Metroid Fusion is terrifying because you're alone, with someone that wants to kill you. And he's multiplying. Metroid Dread takes this even further by leaving you alone with many someones that want to drink you. Not only does Metroid Dread completely kick Fusion's hand-holding and overt linearity, it fleshes out the horror aspects that made Fusion so memorable. This is the fastest Metroid game in which Samus's primary objective is scrapped in favor of GTFO. You're trapped at the bottom of the map. You're underpowered, and you need to claw your way back to your ship on the planet's surface so you can leave. There are several research robots, called Emmys, that will hunt you down similarly to how the SAX would chase after you in Fusion. Except in Fusion, you would encounter the SAX unexpectedly while wandering around. In Dread, there's now a very clear divide between the scary, spooky, being hunted parts, and the regular, more Metroid-y parts. At first, I wasn't a huge fan of this divide. What made the SAX so terrifying is that you knew it was hunting you, and it could pop out at any time. Dread trades these more organic encounters and the initial shock value for a seemingly more intelligent foe, and downright horrifying chase sequences. You may know when you're about to encounter an Emmy, but you're left to actually pull the trigger and step through the door. That anticipation is the source of the game's titular dread. By giving the Emmys their own separate areas, the developers were able to craft encounters in which it felt like the Emmys were on your trail, sniffing you out and even responding to noises that you make. And the way that they climb and slither about is really unnerving, especially as you're waiting in a nearby nook for an Emmy to pass by you. These Emmy encounters are tense and stressful. The earlier ones are all about staying hidden, but by the end of the game, you pretty much have no choice but to gun it through and hope to outmaneuver them. If one catches you, it's an insta-kill, unless you could pull off a perfectly timed parry. I think this is a brilliant mechanic. The parry is very difficult, and it will seem impossible to pull off, but it gives you just a faint glimmer of hope, making every Emmy death a roller coaster of emotions. The sudden shock of being caught, resisting the urge to mash the parry button right away, and then ultimately, your last hope being torn to shreds because of course you failed that parry, you utter fool. Your ultimate goal when faced with these Emmys is to find the Omega Cannon, a temporary power-up that lets you charge up an insanely overpowered beam that can kill them in a single hit. Unfortunately, you first have to melt their face off with a continuous rapid-fire shot to the head, and during all of this, you need to stay absolutely still as the Emmy creeps up to you. These encounters will really test your nerves and force you to use the environment to your advantage. I found myself leading the Emmy through as many narrow corridors as I could, positioning myself at the end of a long hallway so I'd have plenty of time to make my shot. Whenever I finally got that headshot, it always resulted in a huge sigh of relief, followed by a wave of excitement, because killing an Emmy means you get a new upgrade. In a way, I'm kind of glad that this game took 20 years to come out, because it gave me time to mentally prepare myself to deal with all this stress. The Emmy encounters were fun. My only concern is how I'll feel about them in future playthroughs. Will they still be just as terrifying, or will they feel more like a chore, getting in the way of more buttery smooth, modern 2D Metroid action? Because as interesting as these Emmy encounters are, where the game truly shines is in its mastery of the Metroid fundamentals. In my top 10 Metroidvania power-ups video, I wondered how classic Metroid abilities like the Shine Spark and Space Jump would transfer to a modern game. After all, so many brilliant Metroidvanias have come out in the past decade that classic Metroid's controls feel a little clunky in comparison. But that transition has been handled perfectly, and Samus has never felt better to control. All of the classic abilities are here, and there are plenty of new ones as well. Every wall jump and space jump feels precise. I love that you can switch to and from the morph ball with the push of a button, instead of having to do a double crouch like the classic games. You also have a new slide ability, which quickly lets you pass through narrow passages without the hassle of stopping, entering morph ball form, rolling through, and then reverting back to normal. It gives you a really sleek way to slip past some enemies in combat too. I've always found the Shine Spark ability to be cool, but a little awkward. I've always had trouble pulling it off. In Metroid Dread, it finally clicked with me. I like that you can choose when to initiate the speed booster, and I finally felt like I could pull it off consistently. There are quite a number of challenging Shine Spark puzzles scattered across the map, many of them pushing the ability to its limits, like having you do it in morph ball form, or Shine Sparking diagonally into slopes, storing the charge, running to the next slope, and then doing it all again. Some of them had me sitting there for a while, scratching my head about where I even had enough room to activate the speed booster. There are a good number of new upgrades as well. The spider magnet lets you climb along certain walls like a spider ball that's less tedious to use but also more situational. The phantom cloak lets you hide from enemies, although I only found myself using it to hide from enemies and pass through motion detecting doors. My favorite new ability might be the flash shift, which acts like a dash that you can use a few times in quick succession. It has some good mobility uses. I once combined it with a wall jump to sequence break about 2 minutes, until I found that I had reached a dead end anyway. Perhaps its most interesting use though is in combat. Because of the rapid horizontal mobility it offers, you can use it to quickly get out of the enemy's range. I found myself having trouble with the mini-boss after meeting Quiet Robe, only to realize, oh wait, this fight is a lot easier if I dodge his attacks with the flash shift. One thing that initially disappointed me is that there was no distinct super missile ability. On the one hand, it's nice not to have to fumble through a weapon select, but it also takes away an interesting decision that Super Metroid and Zero Mission gave you. If you have 5 really powerful super missiles and 100 regular missiles, you need to make those 5 shots count and manage your ammo much more carefully. Even Metroid Prime's handling of this was fine, using the same ammo pool, but having the super missile use 5 missiles instead of 1. It gave you a reason to keep looking for missile upgrades, even once you were well beyond 100. Metroid Dread upgrades your missiles by replacing them. Regular missiles are replaced with super missiles, which are then replaced by ice missiles. However, my complaints were mostly negated once I found the Storm Missile, which offers you a more powerful attack at the cost of more missiles. Now you can target multiple enemies, and single enemies multiple times, to fire off a barrage of homing missiles. This became my go-to attack for the remaining bosses in the game, as it let me focus on dodging while I charged up an array of storm missiles. By the end of the game, you'll feel like a true badass as you zip around and collect those last few ammo upgrades in traditional Metroid fashion, and you'll have earned it, because Metroid Dread is not an easy game. The game isn't afraid to let you spend some time feeling powerless. I didn't find any major upgrades for the first 30 minutes, and even then, it was the charge shot. One of my primary thoughts in the game's opening hours was, where's my damn morph ball? If you're just expecting to walk left and find it, you're gonna have to wait. Right off the bat, you'll see nooks that would be perfect for the morph ball, but they just won't give it to you. The bosses are tough too, perhaps the toughest in the series. Most of them struck a really good balance of being hard enough to kill me a few times, but then after the 3rd or 4th try, I was able to mop the floor with them. They really test your reaction speed and ability to dodge. I felt a lot less tanky throughout my playthrough than I did in previous Metroids. My only real complaint is that I kinda wish there were more of them. Could have done with 2 or 3 fewer encounters with the Chozo warriors, in exchange for 1 or 2 extra gigantic intimidating creatures to slay, like Kraid or Dragaga. I do want to say that I was spoiled a little bit going into this game, and I don't really mean the plot, or the final boss, or even any of the upgrades that you find. But I did peek at reviews because I was just really excited to see how this game turned out. And I learned that the game is designed to almost always nudge you in the area that you need to go. If you find a new ability, and then shortly after that, that ability gives you access to a teleporter to an older area, you can trust that the game is trying to take you to where you need to be next. You don't even really need to backtrack that much to look for upgrades, because the game will almost always take you back to these spots at some point anyway. With that awareness, I was kind of able to let Metroid Jesus take the wheel, so to speak, and just go wherever the winds took me. It's not that there's no exploration, but I think you could certainly unravel all these teleporters and the paths you take between them to create a pretty linear set of paths to the end. But then again, isn't that the point of Metroid? You're not actually supposed to get lost. The game is just supposed to make you think you're getting lost. Similarly to Super Metroid, the game has little ways of limiting the scope of where you can go, so you aren't completely overwhelmed. Like when you pull a grapple block to move on, and it blocks the way back, or when the environment freezes and leads you on a path to Cataris. As a result, I never really got that feeling of being truly lost. Whether that's an achievement of excellent game design, or a detriment to exploration, is a matter of personal taste. If you love the way that Super Metroid tries to funnel you into where you need to go, then you might love this. If you prefer a game like Hollow Knight, with its vast open-endedness, you might be a little disappointed. Regardless, it's hard to deny that a great deal of care has gone into the level design, and it's a far cry from the linearity of Fusion. They've even deliberately acknowledged and encouraged sequence breaking in their design, with the most widely known example being that you can kill Kraid from the inside if you've already found the Morph Ball bomb. Not only did they create a special cutscene just for killing Kraid in this way, they actively encourage you to attempt it by showing you the Morph Ball launcher during the battle. On a subsequent playthrough, you might wonder, is there a way for me to find this upgrade first, and naturally discover the sequence break on your own? I think this is a really cool way to encourage experimentation and adds a lot to the game's replayability. Perhaps one of my favorite improvements Metroid Dread has made is in its map system. When you come across strange, unbreakable blocks, they'll be noted on your map without spoiling what they are. Once you find the right power-up, they get a proper name. You can then easily highlight these blocks and gates on your map to search for all of the now newly accessible areas. I could have done with a few more features, like completely filtering out items you've already found instead of just making them dimmer, but it's still a vast improvement over the classic map system. One of my biggest reservations about a modern 2D Metroid is the translation of the classic shoot every block until you find the hidden path shtick. It's a very old school gaming trope. I adore the 2D Metroid games, but the most jarring parts of going back to them were these moments of sitting in my Morph Ball, trying to blow up every tile while looking for those extra missile upgrades. I think it's a pretty archaic style of gameplay. It's used more sparingly, if at all, in modern Metroidvanias, and I don't think it has much of a place in games these days. Metroid Dread is stuck in a bit of a pickle, because that kind of exploration is a core part of Metroid's identity, but it handles it pretty well. There are still plenty of hidden blocks to break, but I love that the game has options to point you in the right direction if you're committed to getting that 100% run. The Pulse Radar is a completely optional tool that lets you scan your surroundings and reveal hidden blocks. So instead of having to compulsively bomb every tile of a new room that I enter, I compulsively use my Pulse Radar, which goes by much faster. The map also subtly hints at where you should look if you want to find upgrades that you missed. I didn't even notice this until near the end of the game, but certain squares on the map will occasionally blink if there's something left to find in that area. This makes 100%ing the game so much easier, because now I know to check out the flashing areas, and then once I get there, I can use my Pulse Radar to look for hidden blocks. But it's your choice to use either one of these hints, or none of them. Maybe you just want to know the general area to search, and then explore on your own. Or maybe you suffer from Metroid anxiety, and can't move on from a room until you've blasted that suspicious corner with just one more missile. The Pulse Radar is perfect for that. And if you're a hardcore traditionalist, you don't need to bother with any of that. It's a kind of brilliant way of offering different levels of accessibility to players, without explicitly telling them that they're playing in baby mode. I, for one, will proudly admit to using all of these features. I rarely 100% Metroid games. I usually do around 80 to 90%, but after backtracking through the whole map once, I'm just ready to play something else. But this game, I happily 100%ed while hardly putting it down for a break. Honestly, the only thing I really felt was truly lacking in this game was in its very forgettable soundtrack. The most notable song is a remix of Lower Brinstar from Super Metroid, and that only plays in a cutscene. The music isn't bad by any means, like, say, Yoshi's Crafted World. Just a little disappointing coming from a series with such memorable and atmospheric tracks. On top of that, I was all hyped from the new Harmony of a Hunter album that was recently released. The game had some big shoes to fill in terms of soundtrack, and it didn't really feel like it delivered. Overall though, the game is treated with a great deal of respect and reverence for the series' history. There are tons of little nods to past games, like the X-Parasites covering the world about halfway through, allowing you to absorb them from fallen enemies, just like you could in Fusion. There are even a few bosses that reveal their X-Parasite forms, forcing you to enter a second phase to the fight before absorbing them and their powers. Even Samus is back to her badass self after the backlash of Other M. Just look at her. She has like 3 lines in this game, one of which is bloodthirsty screaming. I'm sure people are now probably going to complain that she didn't show enough emotion in this game, but I enjoyed the return to form for her character. Metroid Dread strikes a respectable balance between catering to longtime Metroid fans without over-relying on pure nostalgia. There are plenty of treats for series veterans, like the inclusion of Kraid and the X-Parasites, but they showed some restraint by not including fan favorite Mecha Chozo Ultra Instinct Ridley. This game stands proudly alongside the other 2D Metroid games as a shining love letter to the fans that have all but given up hope. Metroid Dread is Metroid done right.